to another episode of A Wild Mystery Podcast Appears, where we discuss mysteries, histories, and occasionally conspiracies. I'm your host, Belle.
And I'm your co-host, Ollie.
Today, we are reviewing the history of World War II Japanese Fugo balloons, as well as the current Alaska spy balloon situation.
Today's content warnings are as follows. World War II.
Yeah, I am really bad at putting content warnings now.
Well, I also figure if you you don't have to necessarily mention, if you get stressed about spying, probably don't mention this because that's in the title. Like,
yeah, it's like, I feel like the general...
If you get stressed about Big Brother...
Yeah, well, and it's funny, too, because I don't really go too much into, like, the current stuff. It's more I just, like, go into the history of the spy balloons.
It's interesting.
I also talk about Pearl Harbor.
Okay. Yeah.
And nuclear attacks, briefly. So, we might have to go back.
The opinions expressed in this podcast are the sole views and opinions of Belle and Ollie with a Wild Mystery Podcast Appears. These views are not intended to harm, offend, defame, slander, or negatively represent any individuals involved in the case.
Fugo, which is code Fu, which is weapon, was an incendiary balloon weapon, a bomb, which is developed by Japan against the U.S. This occurred during World War II, and it was a hydrogen balloon that measured 33 feet, which was 10 meters in diameter. It's so funny to me when you can tell, like, something was made not in the U.S. by the fact that it's an even meter measurement.
Yeah.
And the foot measurement is weird, and it's like, yeah.
Yeah.
And the converse is also true, because then you'll be like, oh, it was 40 feet, and then it's like, whatever that is in meters.
47.32.
Yeah,
like,
and you're like,
I'm making
okay.
that up. That's probably not the correct.
Yeah, I don't know the conversions.
Yeah. If that is spot on, then I'm amazing. Because, but it's not, I'm sure.
You're like, nah. The payload for most of these was 4 11-pound or 5-kilogram incendiary devices, plus a single 33-pound or 15-kilogram anti-personnel weapon, which is a weapon that's designed to harm or kill soft targets, which means people, not like tanks or buildings or things of that like. Or in some cases, it would be 1 26-pound or 12-kilogram bomb, which were specifically, those ones were intended to start large forest fires in the Pacific Northwest. In November 1944 and April 1945, the Imperial Japanese Army launched 9,300 balloons from Honshu, which is the largest and most populated island of Japan. 300 were found or observed in the US, Canada, and some even in Mexico. They were carried by high altitude and the high-speed current over the Pacific Ocean, which is now known as the jet stream. They used a sophisticated ballast system to control the altitude. Basically, what this means is the ballast is a compartment within a boat, ship, submarine, or other floating structure that holds water in a ballast tank. Water essentially moves in and out of the ballast tank to balance a ship. In a vessel that travels on the water, the ballast will remain below the water level to counteract the effect and weight above the water level. Basically, it just keeps it level as it's journeying like from to and from its destination.
Like a gyroscope.
Yeah, I would say that's a pretty good. For these specific ones that were intended to be used as fire starters, these were largely ineffective due to the damp conditions in the areas that they were dropped. Overall, the Fugo bombs only caused minor damages, with one exception, which was that one bomb had 6 deaths in a single civilian incident in Oregon in May in 1945, in which a church group, which was one woman who was pregnant and 5 children, were unfortunately killed. And that is the only incident in which deaths resulted. Now, more so on the background of these. They were developed by the Imperial Japanese Army's No. 9 Research Laboratory, which was also known as the Noborito Laboratory. This lab was founded in 1927. In 1933, Lieutenant General Rikishi Tada began an experimental balloon bomb program at Noborito, which became designated as Fugo. This project proposed the prospect that a hydrogen bomb with the parameters I mentioned earlier would contain a time fuse and would essentially be able of delivering its charges up to 70 miles, which was 110 kilometers. This project was stopped in 1935 and was never completed. The Doolittle raid, which is also known as the Tokyo raid, was an air raid on April 18th in 1942 by the U.S. on the Japanese capital Tokyo and other places on the island of Honshu. It was the first American air operation to strike the Japanese archipelago. Also, quick note, I love the word archipelago. Like, big fan.
Yeah. Just sounds...
I don't know, fancy.
Yeah.
The article I read said this caused comparatively minor damage. I assume they're talking about in comparison to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, because obviously those caused much more significant damage. But they didn't really specify that. This attack showed that Japan's mainland was vulnerable to attacks by air. This was considered the initial retaliation for Pearl Harbor, which was Japan's attack on the U.S. naval base in Hawaii on December 7th, 1941. The attack destroyed more than 180 U.S. aircraft, sunk 4 battleships, and damaged or sunk 3 cruisers, destroyers, as well as an anti-aircraft training ship, as well as 1 mine layer. It killed over 2,400 Americans and wounded over 1,100 more. This attack, the Doolittle raid, when I say that I mean the Doolittle raid, apparently was really helpful for American morale during the war, and that kind of, this made me really sad, because it's like, great, we're attacking people and this helps our morale because we were attacked. It's like, I get very testy about subjects like this because it's like, violence on violence, 2 wrongs don't make a right.
Yeah. But I think when you're so detached from...
Yeah. This attack was planned and executed by Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle, and the raid killed about 50 people and injured 400. As a result, the Imperial General Headquarters told Noborito to develop a retaliatory bombing capability against the U.S. In the summer of 1942, they investigated several proposals, which included long-range bombers as well as small bomb-laden seaplanes, which were to be launched from submarines. On September 9th in 1942, they tested the seaplanes in the Lookout air raid. They launched a Yokosuka E-14Y from a submarine off the Oregon coast. Warrant Officer Nobuo Fujita dropped 2 large bombs in the Siskiyou National Forest, which the intention was to start a forest fire and then to safely return to the sub. Fortunately, response crews spotted the plane and were able to contain the small blazes that the bombs caused. Major General Suki Kusaba, who had served under Tada in the original balloon bomb program in the 1930s, was assigned to the lab and revived the Fugo project with a focus on longer flights. The Oregon air raid, which did not, of course, achieve its strategic objective, had demonstrated that the potential of using unmanned balloons at a low cost to ignite large-scale forest fires. And apparently later, with U.S. interviews with Japanese officials after the war had concluded, the balloon bomb campaign was undertaken, quote, almost exclusively for home propaganda purposes, end quote, with the Army having little expectation of effectiveness. And we're also going to talk about some of the development, which I find kind of interesting from a science perspective. In March 1943, Kusaba's team developed a 20-foot, which is a 6.1 meter design, capable of flying at 25,000 feet, 7,600 meters, for more than 30 hours. The balloons were constructed from 4 to 5 thin layers of washi, which is a durable paper from the paper mulberry bush. These were glued together with konnyaku, which is a Japanese potato paste. The Army mobilized, this is actually something I found really interesting, is The Japanese army mobilized thousands of teenage girls at high schools across the country to laminate and glue the sheets together. I just found that really
That's
interesting.
a good idea, I think, actually.
Yeah. Especially if it was more for, like, home propaganda and potentially morale purposes.
Yeah.
It's, like, involving the country.
Mm-hmm.
I understand where they're coming from. I don't know. I thought it was a really interesting thing. The final assembly and inflation tests occurred at large indoor arenas, including Nishigeki Music Hall. I apologize in advance because I know I butchered the shit out of that. And the Ryogoku Kokukan Sumo Hall in Tokyo. The original proposal called for night launches from submarines located 600 miles off the U.S. coast, which is a distance that the balloons could cover in about 10 hours. The balloons were set with a calibrated timer that would release an 11-pound bomb at the end of the flight. 2 submarines, an I-34 and an I-35, were prepared, and 200 balloons were produced by August of 1943, but attack missions were postponed due to the need for submarines as weapons and food transports. Engineers investigated next the possibility of balloon launches against the U.S. from the Japanese mainland, which was a distance of at minimum 6,000 miles. This idea sought to make use of strong seasonal air currents, which were discovered flowing from west to east at a high altitude and speed over Japan, again referencing what is now known as the jet stream. The currents had been investigated by a Japanese scientist whose name is Wasaburo Oishi in the 1920s. In late 1943, the Army consulted Hidetoshi Arakawa of the Central Meteorological Observatory, who used Oishi's data to extrapolate the air currents across the Pacific Ocean. This generated an estimate that a balloon released in winter and that maintained an altitude of 30,000 to 35,000 feet, meaning 30,000 to 35,000 feet, could reach North America in roughly 30 to 100 hours. Arakawa further found that the strongest winds blew from November to March at speeds of about encroaching on 200 miles per hour, which is quite fast. Now, changing pressure levels in a fixed volume balloon posed several technical challenges. Heat from the sun would increase the pressure, risking the balloon rising above the air currents or bursting. To combat this, they added a relief valve to allow gas to escape when the envelope's internal pressure rose above a set level. Alternatively, cool temperatures risked the balloon falling below the currents, an issue that worsened as gas was released. The resolution for this was that engineers developed a sophisticated ballast system, again, mentioning this, whereas before the ballast system I was referring to as in ships and water, what they did with the balloons was a system with 32 sandbags mounted around a cast aluminum wheel, with each sandbag connected to gunpowder blowout plugs. Plugs were connected to 3 redundant aneroid barometers, calibrated for an altitude between 25,000 to 27,000 feet, below which one sandbag was released, and then the next plug would be armed 2 minutes after the previous plug was blown. This design also included a separate altimeter, which was set between 13 to 20,000 feet, which would control the later release of the bombs. They also included a 1-hour activating fuse for the altimeters, which would be ignited at launch, allowing the balloon time to ascend above these 2 thresholds. Tests of this design began in August of 1944 and indicated success, with several of the balloons releasing radiosonde signals for up to 80 hours, which was the maximum time allotted by the batteries. They also included a self-destruct system, which had a 3-minute fuse triggered by the release of the last bomb and would detonate a block of picric acid and destroy the carriage, followed by an 82-minute fuse that would ignite the hydrogen and destroy the envelope. Which is a lot.
Yeah.
Now, in late 1942, the Imperial General Headquarters had directed the Navy to begin its own balloon bomb program in parallel with the Army's project. Lieutenant Commander Kiyoshi Tanaka headed a group that developed the 30-foot rubberized silk balloon, which was designated the B-type, in contrast to the Army's A-type. This design included a silk material with an effort to create a flexible envelope that could withstand pressure changes. The design was tested in August of 1944, but the balloons burst immediately after reaching altitude, and they concluded that this was a result of faulty rubberized seams. The Navy program was consolidated under Army control, partly due to the declining availability of rubber as the war continued. The B-type balloons were later equipped with a version of the A-type's ballast system and were tested on November 2nd of 44. One of these balloons, which was not loaded with bombs, became the first to be recovered by Americans after being spotted in the water off San Pedro, California on November 4th. And the final balloon design had the parameters that we discussed at the beginning, which was a 33-foot diameter balloon and had a gas volume of 19,000 cubic feet and a lifting capacity of 300 pounds at operating altitude. Again, the bombs carried most commonly were 4 11-pound thermite bombs consisting of a steel tube which was 16 inches long and 4 inches in diameter with a mechanical impact fuse. One type 92 33-pound high-explosive anti-personnel bomb, which contained a block of picric acid or TNT surrounded by shrapnel rings. And alternatively to the anti-personnel bomb, one type 97 26-pound bomb contained 3 magnesium containers of thermite. I don't know why it's really intense to me. I'm like, damn. They really didn't want that shit to be doing what it was doing.
Indeed.
Now, interestingly enough, there have been actually some recent recoveries of these balloons. Now, many of these balloons continue to be discovered after the war. At least 8 were found in the 1940s, with 3 being found in the 1950s, 2 in the 1960s, and 1 in the 1970s. I just thought that was really interesting because it literally went like 3, 2, 1 with a decade apart. A carriage with a live bomb was found near Lumbee, British Columbia in 2014 and was detonated by the Royal Canadian Navy Ordnance Disposal Team. And then the remains of another balloon were found near McBride, British Columbia in 2019. A lot of war museums in the US and Canada exhibit Fuggo fragments, including the National Air and Space Museum and Canadian War Museum, which I thought was really interesting. And now for a quick ad break. So, how did this topic come about? For those of you who pay attention to the news, Alaska kind of had some interesting things happen to us a couple of weeks ago. At the time of recording this, which we are recording this on March 5th, so about a month ago, there was some unidentified objects over Alaska. The Pentagon stated that an unknown object was shot down above Alaska. When I say that, I do not mean over the land mass that is Alaska. I mean if you're looking at a map and you're looking at the water above Prudhoe Bay, it was shot over there. And that incident occurred on February 10th. It was shot down by a fighter jet, which was ordered by President Biden, and it happened less than a week after a quote-unquote Chinese spy balloon was shot down over the Atlantic. These events have increased tensions between Washington and Beijing. Now, at the time, and still, there have been no more released reports on this, they couldn't confirm if the object was a balloon or not, but it was at an altitude that posed a risk to civilian aircraft. At a news conference on Friday, the February 10th, John F. Kirby, who is a White House spokesman, said President Biden ordered the unidentified object near Alaska downed, quote, out of an abundance of caution, end quote. Now, what kind of freaks me out is that officials seemed unsure about exactly what they shot down.
Always great.
Always fantastic. Now, As opposed to the earlier spy balloon, this object was over water, so there was less risk of it landing in a populated area, which is a recommendation for earlier events due to concerns about debris. Basically, they waited to shoot down the quote-unquote Chinese spy balloon because it was over a populated area, and they were worried about the debris falling and harming citizens. So they didn't have that same fear with the unidentified object over Alaska because it was over water and therefore wouldn't harm anybody. And at the time that they were shooting it down, it was starting to make its way towards the landmass. Continuing events on Friday evening, 2 officials stated that they were unclear as to who owned or who had sent the object. Again, it was shot down by an F-22 with a Sidewinder air-to-air missile. Also, I just want to say I have a thing for jets, and I think they're really fucking cool, and I'm sorry if you've never seen an F-22 fly with its, like, basically, like they're flying like their ass is on fire. You ain't seen shit. Because it's cool as fuck. Like, if you don't live near an Air Force base or a Navy base that has, like, pilots, and you don't get the privilege of seeing, like, the air shows that they put on, go see one, because it's some of the coolest shit you'll ever see. Several officials said that they believed that the object they shot down on Friday was a balloon, but a Defense Department official said that it had broken to pieces when it hit the frozen sea, which continued to add mystery to whether it was indeed a balloon, a drone, or something else entirely. Mr. Kirby had said that the object was, quote, much, much smaller than the spy balloon that we took down last Saturday, end quote, and that, quote, the way it was described to me was roughly the size of a small car as opposed to the payload that was like 2 or 3 buses, end quote. So interesting size dynamics there. He added that the pilots did confirm that it was unmanned before they brought it down over the Arctic Ocean near Canada. The object was picked up around 9 p.m. on Thursday, Alaska time, and the U.S. Northern Command sent an AWAC, surveillance aircraft, which, by the way, AWAC is AWACS, which, huh?
Why? ECS?
AWACS.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, AWAC.
Yeah.
Which, for me, for some reason, I always thought there was an I in there, but whatever. Which also was accompanied by an aerial refueling plane to track the object. Which also, if you've never seen them refuel planes in the air, what a time to be alive. Holy shit. Have you seen those videos?
No.
You should look it up real quick.
Yeah.
I'm not even kidding.
I'm not as excited, I think, about aviation stuff because it is
part of
where
your
I
life.
live. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I just think, like, planes are cool. So the object... Oh, sorry. Are you watching? It's, like, the long pole thing, and it's, like, the coordination that requires, like, this is just... It's really impressive to me. Because it's, like, also... Because I grew up where... So my grandma... I know that he parachuted into Nam, and then I also know that he was on the ground. I don't fully know what he did, and I should probably look into that one day, but I also don't want to ask him because he does not like talking about it. In fact, he only recently started talking about it in the past, like, year and a half. But it's like, I don't want to talk to him about it, but it's like, I'm still interested in, like, that part, you know, because that's his history, and I would like to know. But also, it's like, I know they're not proud of what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's, you know, hard.
Yeah.
But it's like, he specifically, like, he talked a lot about how he felt more comfortable jumping out of planes than landing in them. Because when he was in the military, it wasn't very rare that it was very rare that he would land in a plane as opposed to jump out of one with a parachute. And I was like, damn. But, like, I grew up with, like, the Blue Angels and, like, all that, and I just, like, planes are fucking cool, and whenever I can, I go to the air shows. Like, you should, I don't think you've ever been in a car with me when I've seen the F-22s flying, and I'm just like...
I don't think so.
I'm like, fucking kid all over again. So, The object had traversed overland in Alaska and was back over the sea heading towards the North Pole, traveling at about 20 to 40 miles per hour before it was struck down. Now, alternatively, the Chinese spy balloon had flown across the United States at 60,000 feet, which is far above the range of commercial airlines. The second object, though, flew much lower, and the reason, again, it was shot down was because it had the potential to interfere with air traffic over Alaska. And as a result, the senior Pentagon official had recommended that it be shot down. Now, U.S. officials, of course, wanted to very much specify that they had no evidence that the object over Alaska had come from China, but, whatever. They also say that the spy balloon had posed no threat, and the reason they allowed it to stay in the air was because they gave our military the time to study it, which included having U-2 spy planes take high-resolution images of its equipment. Now, China asserts that the two balloons spotted last week in the United States and Latin America were both civilian machines used for weather research or test flights. They drifted off course and are Chinese property, is what officials in Beijing had said. Now, the U.S. says that there's been at least 3 intrusions into U.S. airspace by Chinese spy balloons during the Trump administration, and 2 have occurred during the Biden administration, mainly on coastal areas. And before last week, they said that they had entered and left U.S. territory very quickly. So 2 high-altitude objects, one near Dead Horse, Alaska, along the northeastern Alaskan coast, and a second near Yukon, Canada, that have yet to be identified. So basically, there was the Chinese spy balloon, which was over the main part of the U.S. We had this one over Alaska, and then there was another one that was shot down over Canada, which Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau tweeted on Saturday afternoon that he had ordered the takedown of an identified object in the Canadian airspace. And through efforts by the Navy, Coast Guard, and FBI are underway to recover the object shot down near Alaska. Officials have yet to identify its owner or its purpose. And I have not seen any updates about this since. So this is more just hey, this is something interesting that's happening in Alaska, and it's kind of real world events. I think, I don't know. What do you think? What do you think's going on?
I mean, I think China's lying is where I'm at.
Yeah, not trying to start anything, but it's just tensions are high.
Yeah.
All over right now.
Well, what? I get stressed about world news sometimes.
Same. Not gonna lie, I almost didn't go through with this episode anyway, because I was the only reason I did is because I couldn't think of anything else that I could research in time.
Yeah, and it's just kind of because I watched something where the host was talking about, the dimensions of the balloons and how it's actually pretty big, and China has done the whole you broke the Geneva Convention for shooting down these spy balloons, but actually no, because
they were unmanned. That's not.
Yeah, well, and they were large enough that they are not covered by the thing that they were referencing.
Trying to say it was.
Yeah. So, overall, I have been trying not to think about it because I figure better, minds that know more about this than me are on it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I think it can be very disconcerting so, again, Ollie and I are still, I would say, quite young. I'm 26, Ollie is 25. She's only a couple months behind me.
Mm-hmm.
But we, excluding Iraq, Iran, Kuwait, like, we haven't had that experience of a full-scale war with another country like the Ukraine is having to deal with. That's not an experience that we have had. So I think, and I don't want to speak for you, but I think for me it's a very disconcerting thing where it's like, to see the state of the world that we're in right now, it's terrifying.
Well, and
to
honestly,
think that we're this close to, like, World War III.
Yeah, well, I found myself wondering, like, what did the beginning of World War II look like way, way early.
Yeah.
Like, the real
like,
first
with, like,
hints.
I,
yeah.
You know?
I think World War I is more what the...
Yeah.
You know, what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's like, in terms of, because I think I understand what you're saying. It's like, in terms of, like, global tension, was, like, the attack on Pearl Harbor. The U.S. was neutral at the time.
Yeah.
It was not... A lot of people died for nothing. And as a result of that attack, I mean, fuck, like I said, 2,400 people died. 1,100 people were injured. The battleships all were damaged. 2 were sunk. 4 of them were repaired and sent back out.
Yeah.
But then we attacked them, the Doolittle raid. And then you have Hiroshima and Nagasaki. All of that, like, I think the prospect of World War, like, I think a lot of people, and I apologize if I'm, like, stressing you out or something, because it's, like, something that I wouldn't say stresses me out, but no, it stresses me out, is it's, like, thinking of war like that on a level that we have never seen.
Yeah.
In our age. And it scares me to think that how close we could be and how we are, and our fate is in the hands of politicians who didn't give a fucking shit about us.
Yeah.
And are being assholes for the sake of being assholes. And it's the people who are the ones who are paying the price for their decisions.
Yeah. And let's be real about living in Alaska. The only politicians that remember about Alaska are the politicians that live in Alaska.
Exactly. But what's even scarier about that is, like, Alaska was purchased by the U.S. because it was a strategic landmass. Which means if they want to take us out, we'd be a good place to start. That's horrifying.
Well, yeah, that's the thing is, like...
That's why Hawaii was just...
Well, and, I mean,
attacked.
You hear about, Russia invading...
the Ukraine.
Yes. And they said, like, well, it used to be ours.
Yeah.
Alaskans over here sweating.
Yeah. And I still remember when that first happened and we were talking about how it was like, our governor was like, fucking try, asshole. And
which is very Alaskan.
Which is very Alaskan, but also stressful. Because it's like, I mean, yeah, but also like, ooh. Yeah. Another thing, interestingly, to be said about Russia's invasion of the Ukraine is that Russian soldiers were told that they were doing training exercises. They didn't even know the orders that they were following because they thought it was going to be easy.
Well, and the Russian mothers are the ones that are in their version of, like, the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Arguing that their children are being put on the front lines of a war that they don't believe in. Yeah.
And it's, honestly, it kind of takes me back to, like, World War II. Because it's like...
Well, tensions are just... You hear the phrase, political tensions are rising, and it's... I think we hear it so often that we're numb to it.
It's becoming desensitized, yeah.
But it is a phrase that implies a continuation of the rising tensions.
Yes. They've done nothing but rise. It's not like it's like, oh, political tensions are decreasing. You ain't hearing that.
No.
It's just getting worse and worse and worse. I think I'm just, like, I'm scared for, like, the future of the Americas.
Yeah.
Or of the United States of America. But I'm also just, like, scared for the future of, like, Alaska.
Mhm.
Like, I cannot stress this enough. We were purchased, the land, Alaska, was purchased as a strategic land point based on ocean and land. Therefore, if anyone wants to fuck us up, they
Well, and I'm sure the
we have Russian aircraft enter our airspace all the time, way more than people think that we do.
and I'm sure the indigenous people of the Aleutian chain are hyper aware of their position
Yeah.
when it comes to strategic points.
Yes.
And if you don't
And
know what I'm
vulnerabilities.
talking about, Google it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's enough existential dread for today.
Oh yeah, and then some.
Okay. Thank you for listening to today's episode discussing the Fugo balloons and the recent events over the United States, Alaska, and Canada. Thank you for listening to today's episode of A Wild Mystery Podcast Appears, recorded and produced by Belle and Ollie.
Please check out all of our social media where we have additional information shared. You can find all of those links on our website at awmpa.com.
We'd love to hear your feedback for our podcast, so be sure to rate and review.
Tune in next week for another episode of A Wild Mystery Podcast Appears.